If you want to find out how to quickly get ahead of a vast majority of designers in your field, there's your answer. You simply guide the user's eye through sizing and spacing. So if you're looking for a quick answer, there you have it. But if you're also looking for examples and reasoning behind this, then definitely keep watching, because we're going to go through these, and I'm going to also show you how you can apply this technique in your work to vastly improve your designs and move your work to the next level. So if I had to condense most of the things that I have learned over the past decade in this field, it would be that you need to learn how to use sizing and spacing in your favor to communicate your message effectively. So most of you are already most likely doing this subconsciously. So you probably already apply this in your work to some extent, but you probably don't understand the specific reasoning and design theory behind this whole mechanism. So let me show you what I mean. If a user is presented with information, they, especially when it's something new, they tend to get confused pretty easily, right? So if you do not meet certain conventions in terms of presenting information, you won't really be able to communicate what you need to communicate. And if there's something that all of design shares, then that's conveying a message or solving a specific problem. So let's take a look at this, what we have here. So we have a couple of transactions with their names and also their amounts. So this is easy to understand so far, but imagine that we had like multiple of these. We had a lot of rows. If you were zoomed in, for example, like this, it would be very easy to differentiate which amount actually goes to which transaction, right? And why that's the case? It's the case because we are not using spacing to communicate what's being presented effectively. So let's take this one step further and see what could be done about this very quickly. If you group elements by how they are related, for example, if you put transaction 1 and then the amount closer together than individual transactions, then you're gonna produce a situation where it's very easy to differentiate which amount goes where, right? As opposed to this. So that's how you can apply spacing. But then you could also apply sizing or visual prominence in general. So if we now take this one step even further and consider what's the most important thing to communicate, which in this case I think would be the dollar amount. So if, for example, you're looking at your account and you want to find out what's been happening, you're most likely looking for amounts, right? So that's what you want to highlight, and then as a secondary piece of information, you want to provide the transaction names, right? So here's where you combine both sizing and spacing to communicate effectively whatever you want to communicate. And now let me just compare these two situations right here. Now you tell me which one of these two is easier to understand. I am almost sure that almost all of you are going to go for this one. This is way easier to understand what's going on, and immediately, not just from like this distance, but from this distance over here where you barely see the names. And that's what all of this is about. So if you want to design well, you need to consider how the brain is processing information, and you need to take that into consideration when designing your layouts, right? So this is one of those situations. And now let me just show you another thing that I have here, which would be this. Here is a couple of paragraphs that I have typed out to summarize this point. So how to design stuff that actually works. People usually don't know what to focus on first. And I would also maybe put in parentheses here that I would say, especially if they are encountering something new. Therefore, you need to guide their attention through sizing and spacing by providing clear information hierarchy through making important objects proportionally larger, grouping related objects together, and keeping unrelated objects apart. You'll let your users know what should be paid attention to first. Right? First could go here as well. And failing to do this might result in confusion, making it harder to get your message across, which is the biggest mistake of all. Now, this is a couple of paragraphs which works well in an article, in a book, but if we want to apply these rules that we have just went over, this is the final result what it would look like. Let's take a look and let's analyze why this is better than this. So first of all, you capture the attention of the user by making a catchy headline right away, which they will notice immediately. So how to design stuff that actually works. Oh, that's intriguing. I'm gonna read further. Then you also put all of this into one region, right? One common region with a common background. So this is also easy to understand that this is something that belongs together, like a unit of information, right? Let's consider this structure, right? Let me just create these guidelines. You are introducing a spacing system where you put bigger spaces between objects that are not as closely related together as opposed to objects or like paragraphs that are more closely related. So the first section would say this: people usually don't know what to focus on first, therefore you need to guide their attention through, and then you have sizing and spacing. So it's immediately apparent that first of all, this is one section, right, because of the spacing, of the bigger spacing, and it's also immediately apparent that there are two things you need to do, right? This is 1 and this is 2. And it's also apparent that because they take up a lot of space and are visually prominent, that they're going to be important logically, which is exactly the case, similar to here, right? Because sizing and spacing is what all of this is about. And then you introduce the second paragraph with bullet points, where you introduce a type of structure where you basically say with bullet points that these are informationally, semantically speaking, on the same level, and then you have the conclusion, right? So when you compare these two things information-wise, they are identical, right? I may have changed the word here and there. I've removed the parentheses, for example, here, the very last row, but otherwise this is identical. But again, you tell me which one of these is easier to understand, easier to pay attention to, and just generally more interesting, right? So for those of you who really want to dive deep into this design theory, I recommend you take a look at this Gestalt principles, right? This is a set of principles in not only web design, but in just perception, in human perception in general, where, for example, you have a rule that items that are more close together are perceived as more related as opposed to those that are further apart, which is essentially the spacing system. You also get the law of common region, where, for example, it is proven that people perceive objects that share a region like this, a background, that they are perceived to be belonging together, which is correct, right? In this case, that's exactly correct. So basically what I showed you is essentially these principles condensed into the main points that I believe are the most important from my experience working as a designer. So there you have it. If you start doing this, and if you really master this technique, or rather a set of techniques, you will move light years ahead of your competition, and you will definitely produce designs that are easy to understand and just overall interesting and fun to consume. So there you have it. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one.